Any boxing fan with a long enough memory will surely look back with more than just a touch of disgust to the notorious reign of Don King as the sport's most powerful promoter. And King's is darker than you might realize, a tale of blood, betrayal, and billions. Don King was a hugely influential boxing promoter who controlled the careers of champions and went on to orchestrate some of the sport's most lucrative events, promoting fights for legends like Muhammad Ali, Mike Tyson, and Evander Holyfield. With these iconic fighters, he built an empire that dominated boxing for decades, a time when the sport seemed controlled by one man's iron grip. However, while King was known for his flamboyant personality and electric hair, it was the crimes hidden beneath that determined his true, far more sinister legacy. Because if the boxing world had known the full, horrifying extent of King's criminal activities from the beginning, he would never have been allowed to control the sport's biggest stars, let alone define an era of professional boxing. His rise was built on a foundation of violence, deceit, and systemic corruption that poisoned the sport from the inside. Many boxing promoters come from questionable backgrounds. Think of Frankie Carbo, notorious for his mob connections, or Bob Arum, who started as a tax attorney for the Kennedy administration before becoming a shrewd, albeit controversial, boxing figure. Even Frank Warren, a prominent British promoter, survived an assassination attempt. Promoters like these often saw boxing as a cutthroat business opportunity. King, though, had a fundamentally different kind of background, one soaked in blood and violence from his earliest days. King's family wasn't wealthy, but they weren't destitute either. His father died in an industrial accident when Don was young, and his mother raised the family by running an illegal numbers racket in Cleveland. Though a sharp child, King learned early that violence often solved problems. He wasn't the kind of kid who stayed out of trouble, quite the opposite. At just 13, he was arrested for fighting. Later, he was lucky to survive a shootout over gambling debts, and on another occasion, he narrowly avoided prison time for assault before he had even finished high school. He also grew up running illegal gambling operations and collecting debts through brutal intimidation. But these early crimes, significant as they were, would pale in comparison to what was to come. He got into the numbers business at 20 through connections in Cleveland's black community, and he quickly discovered it was something he was more than just moderately good at. King was standing over the body of Sam Garrett, a man he had stomped to death on the streets of Cleveland over a mere $600 debt. He had already killed one man in 1954, Hillary Brown, in what he claimed was self-defense during a robbery attempt. At this point in his life, King had built a small but formidable criminal empire, notorious for its brutality. Now, with a manslaughter conviction looming for Garrett's death, it was time to serve his sentence and figure out his next move. 4 years in Marion Correctional Institution changed everything. While serving time, King discovered boxing, poring over details of Muhammad Ali's fights and the burgeoning professional boxing scene. He studied the business, made crucial connections within the prison and beyond, and when he emerged in 1971, he had a new audacious plan to take over professional boxing from the inside, using every lesson learned on the streets and behind bars. So, with a fresh criminal record and burning ambition, King saw no other option than using his street credentials, innate ruthlessness, and intimidation tactics to muscle his way into boxing promotion. And financially, at least, the decision paid off spectacularly. On entering the promotion business, King was quickly backed by his old numbers running associates, who helped him secure his first major event, a charity boxing exhibition featuring Muhammad Ali. King shrewdly used this high-profile event to establish his legitimacy, though most of the charity money mysteriously disappeared, a grim foreshadowing of his modus operandi. King then went on to become the first promoter to generate over $1 billion in boxing revenue, a sum surely far beyond what he could ever have dreamed of making in the numbers racket. His career progressed rapidly, punctuated by monumental events like the Rumble in the Jungle between Ali and Foreman in Zaire, and the Thrilla in Manila. At these events, he somehow convinced both fighters to sign contracts that gave him unprecedented control. But he only managed to maintain this control through systematic theft, taking millions from fighters through creative accounting, sham contracts, and outright embezzlement. His most famous victim was arguably Mike Tyson, who later sued King for stealing over $100 million through fake promotional fees, inflated expenses, and outright theft. Documents from the lawsuit revealed how King maintained an iron grip over Tyson's finances, denying him access to his own money while King lived lavishly. The FBI investigated King multiple times for racketeering, fraud, and suspected connections to organized crime. Despite numerous indictments, including for tax evasion, he was repeatedly unable to be convicted, largely due to alleged witness intimidation and conveniently destroyed evidence. Somehow, King always walked free, a testament to his power and the fear he inspired. As many criminals before and after King have discovered, boxing promotion can be like a license to steal. And when King got his hands on the sport's biggest stars, he turned theft into an art form, perfecting schemes to fleece his fighters. King also frequently resorted to threats, and when fighters resisted, they paid a severe price. Tim Witherspoon was allegedly threatened with death when he refused to sign a new contract giving King even more control. Meldrick Taylor was effectively blackballed from major fights after questioning King's payments, finding it impossible to secure meaningful bouts during years of his prime. Larry Holmes, another victim, watched millions disappear from his purses, with King claiming exorbitant expenses that were never justified, his trust betrayed by the man who was supposed to champion him. For his part, King never owned his crimes. He freely deflected all accusations with claims of racism, saying later of his decades as boxing's most corrupt figure that critics were just jealous of a successful black man. However, critics often pointed to the fact that many of King's most significant victims were also black fighters, undermining his claims of racial prejudice. He expressed no shame for his behavior or the careers he systematically destroyed. His theft began with his very first promotion and never stopped. Fighters routinely discovered that 50% or more of their promised purses had vanished into King's nebulous promotional expenses or management fees. He was never satisfied, but he later claimed that he was just a good businessman when he felt attacked, using this warped justification for the millions stolen. His crimes didn't stop at theft. He was connected to multiple suspicious deaths, including the suspected murder of his own loyal employee, Carolyn Mack, in 1984. Just before she was due to testify against him in a fraud case. Witnesses were terrified, evidence vanished, and no charges were ever brought against King. In the end, the bodies piled up, and the money kept flowing. When in his own words he woke up in the morning, what he saw in the mirror was the greatest promoter who ever lived. But it also turns out that stealing money was not the only heinous crime King had been committing against the integrity of boxing. When former associates and disillusioned insiders bravely came forward with evidence, they revealed that throughout his career as a promoter, King had been systematically fixing fights, bribing judges, and threatening officials who wouldn't play ball. Multiple sources and newly unearthed documents, including internal memos, financial ledgers, and testimony from co-conspirators, showed a disturbing pattern of predetermined outcomes in major championship fights, orchestrated to maximize King's profit, destroy opponents, or clear paths for his favored fighters. This shocking revelation destroyed the integrity of the sport for an entire generation, leaving fans to question the authenticity of contests they had once revered. He is now widely known as the man who corrupted boxing more than any other figure in history, brazenly turning what should have been pure athletic competition into scripted theater for his own illicit profit. Unlike our previous stories of figures who found some semblance of redemption, there is no such arc for Don King, a completely unrepentant character. Since his days of killing men on the streets of Cleveland, King has never apologized for his actions and continues to claim he's a victim of racism and unfair scrutiny. He still lives in luxury in Florida, protected by a formidable legal team and loyal bodyguards, largely untouchable. His countless victims, the fighters he robbed, the families of those who died under suspicious circumstances, the sport he corrupted and permanently scarred, have never seen justice. In addition to destroying careers and lives, King's most enduring legacy is one of normalized corruption in boxing, creating a blueprint where young fighters still get robbed by unscrupulous promoters following his methods. He also proved that with enough money, power, and intimidation, even murder can go unpunished in America. Even while historical investigations and exposes continue to shed light on his past, King remains free. He has appeared at recent boxing events, still claiming to be the sport's savior, even as many of his victims struggle with the poverty and broken dreams he inflicted upon them. So it seems that in the end, he won every battle against justice and law enforcement, proving that sometimes the bad guys really do win. However, his crimes against boxing, the systematic theft from fighters, the brutal intimidation, and the literal blood on his hands from multiple murders were far worse than any damage done by any other figure in sports history. And unlike the true champions he exploited and whose glory he stole, Don King's hand was raised through corruption, intimidation, and death, leaving behind a legacy of absolute power, absolutely abused.